The dust from the approaching wagon caught Marcus Reed's attention long before he could make out the details of his unexpected visitor. From his position on the covered porch of the Three Rivers Ranch, he watched as the rickety vehicle struggled up the winding dirt road, pulled by a horse that looked as weary as the contraption's creaking wheels sounded. It was past supper time on a Thursday evening in late September, when the Colorado air carried the first hint of winter's approach, and visitors were about as common as hen's teeth in these remote parts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus set down his coffee cup and stood, his weathered hands instinctively checking the position of the revolver at his hip. 27 years of ranching in the high country had taught him that unexpected arrivals rarely brought good news. The woman driving the wagon appeared to be alone, though something about her posture suggested she carried more than just the usual traveler's burdens. As the vehicle drew closer, the distinctive sound of a crying infant cut through the evening air, carried on the mountain breeze like a prayer for help. The wagon finally came to a halt near the ranch house, and Marcus got his first clear look at the woman who had dared to venture into the wilderness with nothing but determination and what appeared to be desperate hope. She was perhaps 25 years old, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins during the long journey, framing a face that might have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. Her dress, once a respectable shade of green, was now faded and travel-stained, and her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the reins. But it was what she cradled in her left arm that truly caught Marcus's attention. A wicker basket, lined with what looked like an old quilt, held not only a squalling infant but also a rust-colored hen that regarded the world with the fierce dignity that only barnyard fowl could muster. The bird sat calmly despite the baby's distress, as if it understood its role as guardian and protector of the small family that had somehow found their way to his doorstep. "Ma'am," Marcus called out, stepping down from the porch with measured steps. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, but there was curiosity there too. "You're a long way from anywhere that might be considered civilization. Is there something I can help you with?" The woman looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds before a summer rain, and Marcus found himself momentarily taken aback by the strength he saw there despite her obvious desperation. She climbed down from the wagon with careful movements, the basket clutched protectively against her chest, the baby's cries growing more insistent with each passing moment. "I'm looking for Marcus Reed," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I was told he might have work for someone willing to earn their keep." She paused, her gaze moving from his face to the sprawling ranch buildings behind him. "I can cook, clean, tend to animals, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I just need a chance to prove it." Marcus studied her more carefully, taking in the determined set of her jaw and the way she held herself upright despite what had clearly been a difficult journey. The baby had quieted somewhat, and the hen in the basket clucked softly as if offering its own commentary on the situation. There was something about this unlikely trio that stirred memories of his own mother, who had arrived at this very ranch 40 years ago under similar circumstances, carrying Marcus as an infant and nothing else but hope. "Work's one thing," he said slowly, his eyes shifting to the basket and its unusual contents. "But I run cattle here, not a nursery. What makes you think this is any place for a woman alone with a child?" He nodded toward the hen. "And I'm curious about your traveling companion there. Most folks don't journey into ranch country with livestock that belongs in a coop." A flush of color rose to the woman's cheeks, but her chin lifted with pride rather than shame. "This is Henrietta," she said, as if introducing a dear friend. "She's been with us since Kansas, and she's the best laying hen you'll find in 3 states, produces an egg nearly every day, rain or shine, and she's got more sense than most people I've known." The baby hiccuped and settled into a quieter fussing, and the woman's voice softened. "As for my son David, he goes where I go. We're a package deal, Mr. Reed, and we're not looking for charity, just an opportunity." Marcus found himself oddly charmed by the woman's straightforward manner and the protective way she spoke of both her child and the bird. There was clearly more to this story than a simple request for employment, but something in her manner suggested that pushing for details would only cause her to retreat. He had learned over the years that people revealed their secrets in their own time, usually when they felt safe enough to do so. "I didn't catch your name," he said, taking a step closer to the wagon and noting the way the horse's ribs showed despite the animal's obvious quality breeding. "And I'm wondering how you knew mine, seeing as how we've never met." "Elena Morales," she replied, shifting the basket to her other arm with practiced ease. "And I heard about you from Tom Brennan down in Silver Creek. He said you were a fair man who judged folks by their work rather than their circumstances." She glanced toward the mountains that surrounded the ranch, their peaks already touched with snow despite the early season. "He also said you might be needing help with winter preparations." Marcus knew Tom Brennan well enough to trust his judgment about people, and the fact that Elena had Tom's recommendation carried significant weight. The old trader had an uncanny ability to read character, and he wouldn't have sent someone to the Three Rivers Ranch unless he believed they were worth Marcus's consideration. Still, the situation was unusual enough to warrant caution. "Tom's got good instincts about people," Marcus admitted, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. But he might have mentioned that this isn't exactly easy country for someone in your situation. Winter comes early up here, and it stays late. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles south, and the closest town is a 2-day ride in good weather. He studied her face for any sign of doubt or fear. It's no place for someone who's not committed to seeing things through to spring. Elena's expression didn't waver, though Marcus noticed her hand tighten slightly on the basket handle. Mr. Reed, I've traveled nearly 800 miles to get here, through weather that would make a mountain man think twice, with nothing but what you see and the hope that there might be a place for us at the end of the journey. Her voice carried a quiet intensity that spoke of determination, forged in the fires of necessity. I'm not afraid of winter, isolation, or hard work. What I'm afraid of is not being given the chance to prove what I can do. The baby chose that moment to let out a particularly loud wail, and the hen in the basket ruffled her feathers, as if expressing her own opinion about the conversation. Marcus couldn't help but notice how Elena immediately began a gentle rocking motion with the basket, soothing both the child and the bird with the same unconscious maternal instinct. It was a small thing, but it spoke to the kind of character that couldn't be faked or taught. "That hen of yours," Marcus said, nodding toward the basket. "Tom mentioned something about her being special. Care to elaborate on what makes Henrietta here worth the trouble of hauling her across half the country?" Elena's face brightened slightly, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen since her arrival. "She saved our lives more than once on this journey," she said, her voice warming with affection. "Not just with the eggs, though, those have kept David and me fed when money ran short. She's got an instinct about weather that puts most forecasters to shame, and she's warned us away from more than one dangerous situation." The hen clucked as if acknowledging the praise, "But more than that, Mr. Reed, she represents something important. Consistency, reliability, the promise that tomorrow will bring what you need if you're willing to tend to today's responsibilities." Marcus found himself impressed by the woman's obvious intelligence and the thoughtful way she spoke about simple things. There was education in her voice, refinement that spoke of better circumstances in her past, but also the practical wisdom that came from learning to survive by wit and determination. The combination intrigued him more than he cared to admit. "Henrietta," he said, addressing the hen directly with the solemnity the moment seemed to require, "that's quite a reputation you've built for yourself." The bird regarded him with one bright eye, then settled more comfortably in the basket as if accepting his acknowledgement of her importance. "And I suppose you're planning to continue this impressive track record here at 3 Rivers Ranch?" Elena's smile widened, and for a moment Marcus caught a glimpse of what she might look like when not burdened by exhaustion and worry. "She is, Mr. Reed. In fact, I'm so confident in her abilities that I'm willing to stake our future on them." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what she was about to propose. "Give us shelter for the night, and if Henrietta doesn't produce an egg by noon tomorrow, we'll move on without asking for anything else. But if she does what I know she'll do, then perhaps you'll consider giving us a chance to prove our worth in other ways." The proposition was unusual enough to catch Marcus off guard, and he found himself studying both the woman and the hen with new interest. There was something almost ceremonial about the way Elena had made the offer, as if she understood that this moment would determine not just their immediate future but the entire course of their lives. The baby had quieted completely now, apparently lulled by the rhythm of adult conversation, and even the evening breeze seemed to have stilled as if waiting for his response. "That's quite a gamble you're proposing," Marcus said slowly, his mind working through the implications of what she was suggesting. "You're willing to bet your future on the laying schedule of a chicken." "Not just any chicken," Elena corrected gently. "Henrietta. And yes, I am, because I know her, Mr. Reed. The same way you know your best horses or your most reliable hands. I know what she's capable of, and I know she won't let us down." Her voice carried such quiet confidence that Marcus found himself almost believing in the hen's miraculous abilities. "Besides, it's not really about the egg, is it? It's about trust, and faith, and the willingness to take a chance on something that might seem impossible." Marcus walked closer to the wagon, his boots crunching softly on the gravel of the ranch yard. The hen watched his approach with alert interest but showed no signs of fear or agitation. If anything, she seemed to approve of his careful, respectful manner. The baby had fallen asleep in the basket, one tiny fist curled against his cheek, completely trusting in his mother's ability to secure their safety. "You know," Marcus said, his voice thoughtful, "my grandmother used to say that you could judge a person's character by how they treated animals and children. She'd look at you and that basket there and probably declare you fit for sainthood." He paused, studying Elena's face in the gathering dusk. "But I'm more practical than she was. I need to know what I'm getting into if I agree to this arrangement." Elena nodded, as if she had expected this question and had prepared herself to answer honestly. "My husband died in a mining accident 6 months ago in Kansas," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "The company that owned the mine offered me $10 for his life and told me I had a week to clear out of company housing. I sold everything we owned except what you see here, and I've been traveling ever since, looking for a place where David can grow up safe and where I can build something resembling a future." The honesty in her voice struck Marcus as genuine, and he appreciated that she hadn't tried to embellish her story or make it more dramatic than it already was. The simple facts were tragic enough, and the strength it must have taken to make the journey she had described was more impressive than any elaborate tale of adventure might have been. "And Kansas seemed like the place to leave behind?" he asked gently. "Kansas held nothing but memories I couldn't afford to keep," Elena replied. "I needed somewhere new, somewhere I could work hard and maybe, eventually, build something that belonged to us."
She looked toward the ranch buildings, their solid construction and obvious prosperity evidence of the kind of security she was seeking. Tom Brennan spoke highly of you, Mr. Reed. He said you were the kind of man who valued hard work over social position, who judged people by what they could do rather than where they came from. Marcus felt a familiar stirring of respect for Tom Brennan's insight into character. The old trader had clearly recognized something in Elena that went beyond her current circumstances, and he had trusted Marcus to see it too. It was the kind of faith in human nature that made the difference between merely surviving in the wilderness and actually building something worthwhile. Tom's got a way of seeing potential where others might only notice problems, Marcus admitted, and I've learned to trust his instincts over the years. He glanced toward the western horizon, where the sun was beginning to paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. But this arrangement you're proposing, it's more than just unusual, it's downright unprecedented. Elena followed his gaze toward the sunset, and Marcus noticed how the changing light brought out the gold highlights in her hair and softened the lines of fatigue around her eyes. There was something almost ethereal about her in that moment, as if she were part of the landscape itself rather than an intruder upon it. Sometimes unprecedented is exactly what a situation requires, she said softly. I know how it must look, Mr. Reed, a widow with a baby and a hen, making promises about eggs and asking for chances that most people wouldn't even consider. But extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary measures, and I believe that both Henrietta and I are capable of more than we appear. The conviction in her voice was compelling, and Marcus found himself drawn into the strange magic of the moment despite his practical nature. There was something about Elena Morales that suggested hidden depths, strengths that hadn't yet been fully tested, potential that was waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. The fact that she had managed to travel 800 miles with an infant and a chicken, surviving whatever hardships the journey had presented, spoke to a kind of resilience that couldn't be taught or faked. Well then, Marcus said finally, his decision crystallizing as he spoke, I suppose we'll find out what Henrietta is made of come tomorrow noon. He gestured toward the ranch house, its windows beginning to glow with the warm light of oil lamps. There's a room in the back of the house that's clean and private. You can settle in there for the night, and we'll see what morning brings. Relief flooded Elena's features, transforming her entire appearance as tension she had been carrying for months finally began to ease. Thank you, Mr. Reed. You won't regret this decision, I promise you that. Maybe not, Marcus replied, though his tone was gentle rather than skeptical. But even if Henrietta fails to perform tomorrow, you're welcome to stay the night and get a proper meal before you decide what comes next. No one should have to face an uncertain future on an empty stomach. Elena's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away, clearly moved by his kindness despite her attempts to maintain composure. That's more generosity than I had any right to expect, she said quietly. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll always be grateful for your willingness to give us this chance. Marcus felt something stir in his chest at the sight of her tears, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years of solitary ranch life. There was something about Elena's combination of strength and vulnerability that appealed to instincts he had thought long dormant, protective urges that had nothing to do with his usual practical considerations and everything to do with the kind of man his father had raised him to be. Come on then, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Let's get you and your traveling companion settled before full dark sets in. The mountain air gets cold quick once the sun goes down, and that baby of yours will need warmth and quiet after the day you've all had. Elena gathered her few possessions from the wagon while Marcus unhitched her horse and led the animal toward the barn. The mare was clearly exhausted but well trained, responding to his gentle handling with the trust of an animal that had been treated kindly despite difficult circumstances. Like her owner, the horse showed signs of breeding and quality beneath the wear of hard travel. She's a good mare, Elena called from the porch where she stood with the basket still clutched protectively in her arms. Her name is Luna, and she's gotten us through situations that would have defeated a lesser horse. I know she doesn't look like much right now, but with proper feed and rest she'll show you what she's really capable of. Marcus found himself smiling at Elena's fierce loyalty to her animals, a trait that resonated with his own deep affection for the creatures under his care. It was another small indicator of character. The way someone spoke about animals that depended on them often revealed more about their nature than hours of conversation about human relationships might accomplish. Luna's welcome to stay as long as you are, he replied, leading the mare into an empty stall and beginning to remove her worn saddle and bridle. She'll get grain and hay tonight and we'll see how she looks in the morning after some proper care. The next few minutes passed in companionable activity as Marcus tended to the horse while Elena gathered her belongings and prepared to enter the ranch house. The domestic routine felt surprisingly natural, as if they had been managing such tasks together for years rather than meeting for the first time less than an hour ago. There was something about Elena's presence that seemed to settle into the rhythms of ranch life without disruption, complementing rather than complicating the established patterns of Marcus's daily existence. When he finally led Elena into the house, Marcus was struck by how right she looked in the space he had inhabited alone for the past 5 years. The ranch house was solidly built, but had always felt somewhat empty despite his efforts to make it comfortable. Elena's presence seemed to bring warmth and life to rooms that had grown accustomed to the solitude of a bachelor's existence. This is beautiful, Elena said softly, her eyes taking in the stone fireplace, the handcrafted furniture, and the careful attention to detail that marked every aspect of the home's construction. You built this yourself?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Most of it, Marcus replied, pleased by her obvious appreciation for the craftsmanship. My father started the house, but I finished it after he passed. Took me the better part of 3 years to get it the way I wanted, but it's solid enough to last several lifetimes. He gestured toward a doorway at the back of the main room. Your room is through there. It's got its own entrance to the kitchen, and there's a crib that belonged to my nephew. Haven't had occasion to use it in years, but it's still sound. Elena's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. A crib? Mr. Reed, you've thought of everything. I don't know how to thank you for such kindness. No thanks necessary, Marcus replied, though he was touched by her obvious appreciation. Just see that you and David get some rest. Tomorrow's likely to be an interesting day, one way or another. As Elena settled into the room with David and Henrietta, Marcus found himself pacing the main room of the house, his mind working through the implications of the strange arrangement he had agreed to. It wasn't like him to make decisions based on sentiment or impulse, but something about Elena Morales had cut through his usual caution and practical considerations. Whether it was her obvious courage, her fierce devotion to her child and her hen, or simply the way she had looked at him with such honest hope, he found himself genuinely invested in the outcome of tomorrow's test. The sound of Elena moving around in the adjacent room, settling David for the night and making Henrietta comfortable in her basket, provided a domestic soundtrack that Marcus hadn't realized he had been missing. For years the ranch house had been filled with the sounds of wind and weather, the distant calls of cattle, and the solitary rhythms of a man living alone. Now suddenly, it hummed with the gentle activity of family life, and Marcus discovered that the change was more welcome than he had expected. When Elena emerged from her room an hour later, David was sleeping peacefully, and Henrietta was settled on a makeshift roost that Elena had fashioned from a wooden box and some old blankets. She moved quietly through the kitchen, clearly intending to prepare something simple for supper, but Marcus intercepted her before she could begin. You've traveled far enough for one day, he said firmly. Sit yourself down and let me handle supper. It won't be fancy, but it'll be filling and warm. Elena looked as if she might protest, but exhaustion finally overcame her instinct to be useful. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table with a sigh of relief that spoke to just how tired she really was. I'm not accustomed to being waited on, Mr. Reed. It feels strange to sit idle while someone else works. Sometimes strange is exactly what we need, Marcus replied, echoing her earlier words as he began assembling ingredients for a simple meal. Besides, you'll have plenty of opportunities to prove your usefulness if Henrietta comes through tomorrow. Tonight you're a guest in my home, and guests don't cook their own supper. As Marcus worked, Elena watched him with obvious interest, taking in the efficient way he moved around the kitchen and the care he took with even simple tasks. There was something soothing about the domestic routine, the quiet conversation, and the growing sense of connection between two people who had been strangers only hours before. You know, Elena said softly, I haven't felt this safe in months. There's something about this place, about you, that makes everything seem possible again. Marcus paused in his cooking, struck by the quiet sincerity in her voice. When he turned to look at her, he saw that the exhaustion had lifted slightly from her features, replaced by something that might have been hope taking tentative root. This ranch has always been a place where impossible things become possible, he replied, his voice thoughtful. My father used to say that the mountains have a way of testing people, but if you can pass their tests, they'll give you more than you ever dreamed of asking for. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her entire face and giving Marcus a glimpse of the woman she had been before hardship had worn her down. Then perhaps Henrietta and I have found exactly where we belong, she said quietly. As the evening deepened and they shared their simple meal, Marcus found himself thinking that perhaps Elena was right, perhaps the mountains had sent him exactly what he needed, even if he hadn't realized he needed it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and revelations, but tonight, for the first time in years, the Three Rivers Ranch felt complete. Outside, the Colorado night settled over the high country with its familiar embrace of stars and silence, while inside, three unlikely companions prepared to discover whether faith, hope, and one very special hen could indeed work miracles. The stage was set for a test that would determine not just their immediate future, but the beginning of something none of them could yet imagine. Dawn crept across the Colorado mountains with fingers of pale gold, touching the peaks and gradually working its way down into the valley where the Three Rivers Ranch lay nestled among the pines. Elena had been awake for over an hour, her internal clock attuned to the needs of an infant who cared nothing for the momentous nature of the day ahead. David had nursed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, and now lay contentedly in the wooden crib that Marcus had provided, his tiny fingers grasping at dust motes dancing in the early morning light streaming through the window. Henrietta sat regally in her makeshift roost, preening her rust-colored feathers with the methodical attention of a creature who understood the importance of maintaining appearances. Elena watched the hen with a mixture of confidence and nervousness that she tried to keep hidden beneath a calm exterior. She had staked everything on Henrietta's reliability, and while she had never known the bird to fail in her daily production, the weight of their future made this morning feel different from all the others that had come before. The sound of movement from the main part of the house told Elena that Marcus was beginning his own morning routine. She could hear the familiar sounds of a rancher starting his day, the gentle clatter of coffee preparation, the creak of floorboards under boots that had walked these same paths for years. There was something comforting about the domestic rhythm, a sense of stability that Elena had not experienced since her husband's death had shattered the carefully constructed life they had built together in Kansas. Elena dressed carefully in her one remaining good dress, a deep blue cotton that had seen better days but still maintained its dignity, despite the hardships of travel. She brushed her auburn hair and pinned it back with the silver combs that had been her mother's, wanting to present herself as someone worthy of the chance Marcus was giving them. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand showed the strain of recent months, but there was determination there too, and a growing spark of hope that she hardly dared acknowledge. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparations, and Marcus's voice called quietly from the other side, "Mrs. Morales, I've got coffee ready if you'd like some. No hurry, but I thought you might appreciate something warm before we see what the morning brings." Elena opened the door to find Marcus holding a steaming cup, his weathered face showing signs of his own early rising. He had clearly taken care with his appearance as well, his shirt clean and his hair combed back, as if he too understood that this morning held significance beyond the ordinary routine of ranch life. His gray eyes met hers with a combination of curiosity and something that might have been anticipation. "Thank you," Elena said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth of the cup against her palms was almost as welcome as the gesture itself. "I hope we didn't disturb your sleep. David was restless for a while during the night." "Didn't hear a thing," Marcus replied, though his gentle tone suggested he wouldn't have minded if he had. "How's Henrietta this morning? She settling in well to her new surroundings?" Elena glanced back toward the basket where the hen sat with alert dignity. "She seems quite comfortable, actually. I think she approves of the accommodations." She paused, taking a sip of the coffee and appreciating its rich flavor. "She's always been adaptable, but there's something about this place that seems to agree with her. She's been more active this morning than I've seen her in weeks." Marcus stepped closer to observe the hen, who regarded him with bright, intelligent eyes. "She's a fine-looking bird," he said with the appreciation of someone who understood good livestock. "Got good color in her comb and a bright eye. Those are signs of health in poultry." He looked back at Elena with a slight smile. "Tom Brennan mentioned she was special, but I'm beginning to think he might have understated the case." The mention of Tom Brennan brought a warmth to Elena's expression. The old trader had been more than kind to her during their brief encounter in Silver Creek, offering not just directions to the Three Rivers Ranch, but also words of encouragement when her courage had been flagging. "Mr. Brennan saw something in Henrietta that I think most people would miss," she said. "He understood that she represents more than just a source of eggs. She's been our constant companion through everything, our one reliable source of sustenance and hope." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, his gaze moving between Elena and the hen with growing understanding. "Seems to me that loyalty like that deserves respect, regardless of the species involved." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I've got breakfast started if you're ready to join me. Nothing fancy, but it'll give us something to do while we wait for the main event." Elena gathered David from his crib, and the small family made their way into the kitchen, where the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filled the air with the promise of comfort and sustenance. Marcus had clearly gone to some effort to make the meal special, and Elena found herself touched by his consideration for what he seemed to understand was more than just an ordinary morning. As they sat at the wooden table that occupied the center of the kitchen, Elena found herself studying Marcus more carefully than she had the previous evening. In the clear morning light she could see the character written in his face, the lines carved by years of honest work and responsibility. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup were those of a man who built things rather than destroying them, who solved problems through persistence and skill rather than force or cunning. "You've been alone here long?" Elena asked, the question emerging from her observations rather than idle curiosity. Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, considering the question with the same thoughtfulness he seemed to bring to all serious topics. 5 years now," he said finally. "My father passed in the winter of 1878, and I've been managing the ranch on my own since then. Had help from time to time, seasonal hands and such, but mostly it's just been me and the cattle and the mountains." Elena heard something in his voice that suggested the solitude hadn't been entirely by choice, though she sensed this wasn't the time to probe deeper into that particular subject. Instead, she focused on the present moment and the growing sense of connection she felt with this man who had taken a chance on her and her unusual family. "It's a beautiful place to call home," she said, looking out the kitchen window toward the mountains that rose like guardians around the valley. "I can understand why you'd want to stay here, build something lasting in a place like this." "It gets lonely sometimes," Marcus admitted, his honesty surprising even himself. "There's something about mountains that makes a man philosophical, makes him think about what really matters in life. I've had plenty of time for thinking over the past 5 years. Elena felt a flutter of something in her chest at his words, a recognition of shared experience that went deeper than their current circumstances. "Loneliness has a way of teaching us things we might not learn otherwise," she said quietly. "Sometimes it shows us what we've been missing, and sometimes it shows us what we're capable of handling on our own." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft clucking from the direction of Elena's room, and both adults turned toward the sound with sudden attention.
Elena set down her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from nervousness or excitement she couldn't have said. "That sounds promising," Marcus observed, his own voice carefully neutral though Elena could detect the underlying interest. Elena stood from the table, her heart beginning to beat faster as the moment of truth approached. "Henrietta has her own way of announcing important events," she said, trying to keep her tone light despite the magnitude of what that simple sound might represent. "She's always been quite vocal about her accomplishments." Marcus followed Elena toward her room, both of them moving with the careful steps of people approaching something that might prove either wonderful or devastating. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, as if the day itself understood the significance of what was about to unfold. In her makeshift roost, Henrietta sat with the satisfied air of a creature who had completed an important task. Beneath her, nestled in the soft bedding Elena had arranged, lay a perfect brown egg, its shell gleaming in the morning light like a small miracle made manifest. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes as she gently lifted the egg, cradling it in her palm with the reverence it deserved. "Oh, Henrietta," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you beautiful, wonderful bird, you've done it again." Marcus stood beside her, staring at the egg with an expression that mixed amazement with something deeper, a recognition that he was witnessing something far more significant than a simple biological function. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "She actually did it." Elena turned to face him, the egg still cupped carefully in her hands. "I told you she was special," she said, though her voice carried triumph rather than smugness. "Henrietta has never let us down, not once in all the months we've been traveling. She understands what depends on her, and she rises to meet the challenge every single time." Marcus reached out to touch the egg gently with one finger, as if confirming its reality. "It's not even full sunrise yet," he marveled. "Most hens don't lay until well into the morning, if they lay at all on a given day. This is something extraordinary." Elena nodded, her confidence in Henrietta vindicated, but her awareness of what came next growing stronger with each passing moment. "So," she said, meeting Marcus's eyes with steady determination, "does this mean you're willing to give us that chance you mentioned? The opportunity to prove we can be more than just overnight guests?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the egg to Elena's hopeful face to the contented hen who had just altered the course of all their lives. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that went far beyond the simple terms of their original agreement. "Mrs. Morales," he said formally, "I believe Henrietta has more than fulfilled her part of our bargain. The question now is whether you're prepared to fulfill yours." He paused, studying her face. "This ranch is a demanding place, and the work here isn't easy. The winters are long and isolating, the summers are short and intense, and there's always more to do than there are hours in the day to do it. If you're truly committed to staying, to making this place your home, then I'm willing to give you that chance." Elena felt a rush of relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. "Mr. Reed, I promise you won't regret this decision. I'll work harder than any hand you've ever hired, and I'll prove to you that faith in us was well placed." Marcus smiled then, the expression transforming his usually serious features, and giving Elena a glimpse of the man he might have been under different circumstances. "I'm beginning to think I already know that," he said. "But we'll take things one day at a time, see how we all adjust to the new arrangements." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity, as Elena worked to establish her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She threw herself into every task with determination that impressed even Marcus, who had expected dedication but was surprised by the scope of her capabilities. Elena could indeed cook, and her meals quickly became the highlight of the day for Marcus, who had grown accustomed to his own simple and repetitive fare. She approached cleaning with the same thoroughness she brought to everything else, transforming the ranch house from a comfortable but purely functional space into something that felt truly like a home. But it was her work with the animals that truly set Elena apart from what Marcus had expected when he agreed to let her stay. She had an intuitive understanding of livestock that couldn't be taught, an ability to read the moods and needs of cattle, horses, and even the barn cats that wandered the property in search of mice and warm places to sleep. Marcus found himself watching her work with growing admiration, recognizing in her the same instinct for animal husbandry that had made his father successful in building the Three Rivers Ranch into a thriving operation. Henrietta had settled into ranch life with the same aplomb she had shown throughout their long journey. Marcus built her a proper coop near the kitchen door, and she took up residence there with the dignity of a queen claiming her rightful throne. True to Elena's promises, the hen produced an egg nearly every day, and her reliable contribution to their meals became a small but significant part of the ranch's daily routine. David, too, seemed to thrive in the mountain air. The baby, who had been fretful and anxious during their travels, began to sleep better and cry less, as if he too understood that they had finally found a place of safety and stability. Marcus found himself drawn to the child in ways that surprised him, often stopping by Elena's room in the evenings to check on the baby's progress, and finding excuses to hold the small warm weight of new life against his chest. As October deepened into November, the first serious snows began to dust the higher peaks, and Marcus began the annual preparations for winter that would determine whether the ranch and its inhabitants would thrive or merely survive through the months of isolation ahead. It was during this time that Elena's true value became apparent, as she threw herself into the work of preserving food, organizing supplies, and preparing the buildings for the harsh weather that was coming. You know, Marcus said one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, Elena canning the last of the vegetables from the ranch garden while he repaired a broken harness. I'm beginning to wonder how I managed all this by myself for so many years. Elena looked up from the jars she was sealing, her face flushed from the heat of the stove but glowing with the satisfaction of useful work. Maybe you didn't really manage it, she suggested with a gentle smile. Maybe you just survived it, and there's a difference between the two. Marcus considered her words as he worked the leather, recognizing the truth in what she had said. The ranch had functioned during his years of solitude, but it hadn't flourished. There had been a quality of mere endurance to his existence that he was only now beginning to recognize as he experienced the difference that Elena and David's presence had made.
You might be right about that, he admitted. Things do seem to flow more smoothly with extra hands and a woman's touch around the place. Elena felt a warmth at his words that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. Over the weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of Marcus as more than just an employer who had taken pity on her circumstances. There was a fundamental decency to the man that drew her like a moth to flame, a steadiness and strength that made her feel safe in ways she hadn't experienced since her husband's death. Their evening conversations had become the highlight of Elena's days, quiet moments when David was sleeping and the day's work was done, when they could sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Marcus was an intelligent man despite his lack of formal education, and Elena found herself looking forward to his perspectives on the books she had brought with her, the few precious volumes that had survived her journey from Kansas. I've been thinking, Marcus said one evening as they sat in the main room, Elena mending one of his shirts while he cleaned his rifle in preparation for the hunting season, about the spring, about plans for expanding the ranch operation. Elena looked up from her sewing, recognizing something significant in his tone. What kind of expansion did you have in mind? Marcus set down the rifle and turned to face her directly. I've been thinking about increasing the size of the herd, maybe improving the breeding stock. There's good grazing land to the north that I've never fully utilized, and with help, he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. With the right partner, I think this ranch could become something special. Elena felt her heart begin to beat faster at the implication in his words. Partnership is a serious thing, Mr. Reed. It requires trust and commitment from both parties. It does, Marcus agreed, his gray eyes steady on her face. And I think we've both proven ourselves capable of those qualities over the past few weeks. He hesitated, then continued with the careful tone of a man venturing into unfamiliar territory. Elena, what I'm trying to say is that I'd like you to stay permanently, not as hired help, but as a true partner in this operation. You've shown me what this place could become with the right person working alongside me. Elena set down her mending, her hands trembling slightly as the full meaning of his words sank in. Marcus, she said, using his first name for the first time, are you asking me to marry you? Marcus stood from his chair and crossed to where she sat, dropping to one knee beside her with a formal gravity that spoke to the seriousness of the moment. I am, he said simply. I know it might seem sudden, but I've learned more about what I want in life in the past few weeks than I learned in 5 years of solitude. You and David have brought something to this place that I didn't even know was missing. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked down at this good man who was offering her not just security but partnership, not just shelter but a true home. Marcus, she whispered, I care for you deeply, but I need you to understand what you're taking on. David isn't your son, and there will always be people who judge us for the unconventional way we've come together. Marcus reached up to cup her face gently in his weathered hands. David is the son of the woman I love, he said firmly. That makes him my son in every way that matters. As for what people think, we're building something here that's bigger than their small-minded judgments. Elena leaned into his touch, feeling the last of her reservations melt away in the face of his certainty. Then yes, she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, I'll marry you, Marcus Reed. I'll be your partner in every sense of the word. Marcus stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like coming home after a long and difficult journey. For a moment, they simply held each other, both understanding that they had just committed to a future that neither had dared to imagine when Elena first arrived at the ranch with nothing but hope and a basket containing a baby and a hen. From her place near the fire, Henrietta clucked softly as if offering her own approval of the proceedings. The sound made both Marcus and Elena laugh, breaking the emotional intensity of the moment and reminding them of the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. I suppose we owe Henrietta a debt of gratitude, Marcus said, his arms still around Elena. Without her morning performance, none of this would have been possible. Elena smiled up at him, her heart full of love and possibility. She's always known what was best for us, she said. I think she knew from the moment we arrived that this was where we belonged. As the Colorado winter settled over the Three Rivers Ranch, Elena and Marcus began planning for their spring wedding, their shared future, and the expansion of both their family and their operation. The partnership they had formed was already proving successful, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that benefited every aspect of ranch life. But even as they planned for the future, neither Elena nor Marcus could have anticipated the challenges that would test their newfound happiness, or the way their love would be proven in the crucible of circumstances neither could have imagined. The mountains that surrounded their valley held secrets and surprises, and the spring would bring changes that would require all their combined strength and determination to navigate successfully. For now, though, they had each other, they had David, they had Henrietta, and they had the growing certainty that sometimes the most important journeys begin not with careful planning but with the courage to trust in the unexpected gifts that life occasionally offers to those brave enough to recognize them. Spring arrived at the Three Rivers Ranch with a suddenness that caught even seasoned mountain dwellers by surprise. The snow that had blanketed the valley for months melted in rushing torrents, swelling the creeks and turning the ranch roads into muddy channels that challenged even the surest-footed horses. Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching the transformation of the landscape from winter's stark beauty to the vibrant green promise of the growing season, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly that marked the newest addition to their growing family. The wedding had taken place in February, a simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor with only Tom Brennan and the circuit preacher as witnesses. Elena had worn her mother's ivory silk dress, carefully preserved through all their travels, while Marcus stood beside her in his finest suit, his weathered hands gentle as he placed a gold band on her finger. David, now crawling and babbling his first words, had served as an inadvertent ring-bearer, reaching for the shiny objects with the fascination of a child discovering the world's treasures. Henrietta had watched the proceedings from her place of honor near the fireplace, clucking approvingly as if she understood that her faithful service had brought about this moment of joy and commitment. The hen continued her daily egg production with the reliability that had made her legendary among the few neighbors who had heard the story of their arrival at the ranch. Tom Brennan had taken to calling her the miracle bird, and even the circuit preacher had declared her an example of divine providence working through humble means. The months following the wedding had been among the happiest of Elena's life. Marcus proved to be a devoted husband and father, treating David as his own son in every way that mattered. He had built a proper nursery for the growing boy, crafting a rocking horse and toy chest with the same careful attention to detail he brought to all his work. Elena often found him in the evenings, teaching David to stack wooden blocks, or reading to him from the few children's books they had managed to acquire during their rare trips to town. But it was the discovery of Elena's pregnancy that had truly cemented their sense of family and purpose. Marcus had received the news with a joy that transformed his usually serious demeanor, sweeping Elena into his arms and spinning her around the kitchen while David clapped his hands in delight at the unusual display of exuberance. They had spent long evenings planning for the future, discussing names and nursery arrangements, dreaming of the day when their children would run through the mountain meadows and help with the ranch work that was their heritage. The expansion plans Marcus had mentioned during their courtship had taken concrete form over the winter months. They had ordered breeding stock from Denver, arranged for the purchase of additional grazing land, and made plans to build new corrals and outbuildings to accommodate their growing operation. Elena had thrown herself into the business side of ranching with the same determination she brought to every aspect of her new life, keeping meticulous records and corresponding with potential buyers for their cattle. Everything had seemed perfect, their future bright with promise and possibility. Then Robert Garrison arrived. Elena first noticed the stranger during one of her morning walks around the ranch perimeter, a routine she had maintained throughout her pregnancy to stay strong and healthy for the challenges ahead. The man sat his horse with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was studying their operation with more than casual interest. When their eyes met across the distance, he touched his hat brim in polite acknowledgement, but Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. That evening, as she and Marcus worked together to repair a section of fence damaged by the spring runoff, Elena mentioned the encounter. "There was a stranger watching the ranch today," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "A well-dressed man on a fine horse, positioned up on the ridge where he could see most of our operation." Marcus straightened from his work, his expression growing serious. What did he look like? Elena described the man as best she could, noting his expensive clothes and the quality of his equipment. He seemed to be making mental notes about everything he saw. The way he sat his horse, the way he was positioned, it felt like he was conducting some kind of survey, rather than just passing through. Marcus set down his tools and looked toward the ridge Elena had indicated, his jaw tightening with concern. "I don't like the sound of that. Strangers don't usually take such detailed interest in other people's property unless they have reasons of their own." Their concerns proved justified when Robert Garrison rode boldly into their ranch yard the following afternoon, leading a small group of men who had the hard-eyed look of professional trouble. Elena was hanging laundry when they arrived, and she immediately called for Marcus while positioning herself where she could keep watch over David, who was playing in the dirt near the kitchen door. Marcus emerged from the barn with the deliberate stride of a man prepared for confrontation, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man on his own land, "what can I do for you?" Garrison dismounted with theatrical flourish, his expensive boots gleaming despite the muddy conditions. "Marcus Reed, I presume? I'm Robert Garrison, representing the Colorado Mountain Development Company. I believe we have some business to discuss." Elena felt her blood run cold at the man's presumptuous tone, but Marcus remained steady, his expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. "I don't recall having any business with your company, Mr. Garrison. What exactly is it you think we need to discuss?"
Garrison smiled with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way through a combination of charm and intimidation. Progress, Mr. Reed, the future of this entire valley, and your place in it. He gestured toward the surrounding mountains with expansive authority. The railroad is coming through next year, and with it opportunities that will transform this entire region. Those who position themselves correctly stand to profit handsomely. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his skepticism evident. And I suppose you're here to tell me how I should position myself? Indeed I am, Garrison replied, reaching into his coat to withdraw a folded document. I'm prepared to make you a generous offer for your ranch, Mr. Reed. More money than you could make from cattle in 10 years, with the guarantee that you'll be part of the development rather than an obstacle to it. Elena moved closer to Marcus, her protective instincts aroused by the veiled threat in Garrison's words. From her new position, she could see the document he held, recognizing the legal language that spoke of surveys and property assessments. This was no casual business proposition, but a carefully planned acquisition attempt. Marcus made no move to take the offered document. My ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Garrison. Not at any price. This land has been in my family for 30 years, and I intend for it to stay that way for the next 30. Garrison's smile never wavered, but Elena caught the flash of annoyance in his eyes. I understand the sentimental attachment, Mr. Reed, truly I do, but sentiment won't stop progress. The railroad needs this route, and they will have it, one way or another. I'm simply offering you the opportunity to profit from the inevitable rather than be crushed by it. Marcus stepped forward, his own smile cold and humorless. Is that a threat, Mr. Garrison? Merely a statement of reality, Garrison replied smoothly. There are legal mechanisms available to entities working for the public good. Eminent domain, for instance, can be a powerful tool when private interests conflict with public necessity. He glanced meaningfully at Elena and David. Of course, such proceedings can be lengthy and expensive, particularly difficult for families with responsibilities. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, recognizing the implicit threat to their family. She placed a calming hand on his arm, knowing that violence would only give Garrison the excuse he might be looking for to escalate the situation. Mr. Garrison, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I think you've made your position clear. We'll need time to consider your offer. Garrison turned his attention to Elena with the calculating gaze of a man reassessing his strategy. Ah, the lovely Mrs. Reed. Tom Brennan mentioned you in town, spoke quite highly of your adaptability. His tone carried implications that made Elena's skin crawl. Perhaps you could help your husband see reason. After all, you have more than just yourselves to consider now. The reference to her pregnancy was clearly intentional, designed to emphasize their vulnerability. Elena lifted her chin with dignity that reminded Marcus of the woman who had arrived at his ranch with nothing but courage and a basket containing a baby and a hen. Mr. Garrison, my husband and I make our decisions together, and I can assure you that neither of us is inclined to be intimidated by veiled threats. Garrison's mask of civility slipped slightly, revealing the harder man beneath. Mrs. Reed, I hope you understand what you're choosing. This valley will be developed with or without your cooperation. Those who stand in the way of progress tend to find themselves displaced. Marcus had heard enough. Mr. Garrison, I believe you've worn out your welcome. I'll ask you and your men to leave my property immediately. Garrison remounted his horse with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider, Reed. After that the offer expires, and you'll be dealing with less flexible representatives of the development company. He touched his hat brim in mocking courtesy.
Good day, Mrs. Reed. I do hope you'll use your influence wisely. As Garrison and his men rode away, Elena felt the first stirrings of the fear that would dominate the following weeks. This was not the simple conflict between neighbors that could be resolved through conversation and compromise. Garrison represented forces larger and more ruthless than anything they had faced before, entities that saw their ranch not as a home and livelihood, but as an obstacle to be removed by whatever means necessary. That night, as they sat by the fire discussing their options, Marcus and Elena tried to maintain their usual optimism, but both could feel the shadow that Garrison's visit had cast over their future. David played at their feet, building towers with his wooden blocks and knocking them down with gleeful destruction, blissfully unaware of the adult concerns that surrounded him. We could fight it in court, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he held little hope for that option. Property rights are supposed to mean something in this country, even when they conflict with railroad interests. Elena shook her head, her hand resting on her growing belly. Men like Garrison don't make threats they can't back up. If the railroad wants this route badly enough, they'll find legal ways to take what they need. And even if we could win in court, how long would it take? How much would it cost? What would it do to our family while we fought? Marcus reached over to take her hand, his weathered fingers gentle against her palm. Elena, I won't let them drive us from our home. This ranch is our children's inheritance, the foundation of everything we've built together. There has to be a way to fight this. Elena squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his determination even as she worried about the cost of resistance. I know, my love, but we need to be smart about how we fight. Garrison and his people have resources we can't match, connections we don't have. If we're going to win this, it will have to be through strategy rather than force. Their planning was interrupted by an unusual disturbance from Henrietta's coop. The hen, normally settled quietly for the night, was making agitated sounds that suggested something had disturbed her usual routine. Marcus rose to investigate, returning a few minutes later with a grim expression. "Someone's been prowling around the property," he reported. "Fresh horse tracks near the coop, and Henrietta's upset enough to suggest whoever it was got pretty close to the house." His jaw tightened with anger. Garrison's not wasting any time sending his message. Elena felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. The idea of strangers moving around their property in darkness, watching their home and family, violated the sense of security she had worked so hard to build. "What do we do?" Marcus checked the loads in his rifle and pistol, his movements efficient and practiced. "We take precautions. I'll sleep light and keep weapons close. Tomorrow I'll ride to the neighbors, let them know what's happening. Maybe organize some kind of mutual protection arrangement." The following days passed in tense watchfulness, with Marcus and Elena taking turns maintaining guard over their property and family. The work of the ranch continued, but underneath the routine of daily tasks lay a constant awareness of threat, a knowledge that their peaceful existence had been shattered by forces beyond their control. It was during this period of stress that Elena's pregnancy began to show signs of strain. The constant worry and disrupted sleep patterns took their toll, and she found herself experiencing pains and discomfort that concerned both her and Marcus. When she mentioned her concerns to Martha Williams, the wife of their nearest neighbor, the older woman's face grew serious with worry. "Elena, dear, you need to think about what's best for that baby you're carrying," Martha said gently but firmly. "All this stress and fear isn't good for either of you. Maybe it would be wise to consider Garrison's offer, take the money and start fresh somewhere else." Elena understood the practical wisdom in Martha's words, but something deep inside her rebelled against the idea of surrender. "Martha, if we give in to Garrison now, what's to stop others like him from taking whatever they want from whoever they want? Sometimes you have to make a stand, even when the odds are against you." Martha shook her head with the resignation of someone who had seen too much of life's unfairness. "Honey, sometimes standing up to bullies just gets you hurt worse than if you'd walked away. You've got children to think about now, and another one coming. Is your pride worth risking their future?" The question haunted Elena as she rode home through the mountain twilight, Martha's words echoing in her mind with uncomfortable truth. Was her determination to fight Garrison born of principle or stubborn pride? Was she risking her family's safety for the sake of abstract ideals about property rights and standing up to intimidation? Her internal debate was interrupted by the sound of gunshots from the direction of their ranch. Elena urged Luna into a gallop, her heart racing with fear for Marcus and David. As she crested the final hill before home, she could see smoke rising from the direction of their barn, and her worst fears seemed to be confirmed. Marcus met her in the ranch yard, his face grim but relieved to see her safe. "They fired the hay barn," he reported tersely. "Waited until I was in the far pasture checking on the breeding stock, then set the fire and rode off before I could get close enough to identify them." His hands shook slightly as he helped her down from the horse. "Elena, they could have set the house instead of the barn. This was a warning, not an attack." Elena looked at the smoldering ruins of the barn, calculating the loss in practical terms, while trying to control her emotional response to this escalation of their conflict. The hay had represented their winter feed supply, months of careful work destroyed in minutes by men who saw their family as nothing more than obstacles to profit. "How bad is the loss?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Marcus's expression was grave. "Bad enough. We can replace the building, but the hay will cost us most of our cash reserves, and if they're willing to burn barns, they might be willing to do worse next time." That night, as they held each other in their bed while David slept peacefully in his nearby crib, Elena and Marcus finally admitted the full scope of the threat they faced. Garrison was not going to be deterred by their refusal, and his methods would only escalate until they either surrendered or were forced to abandon everything they had built. "Maybe we should consider his offer," Elena said quietly, the words tasting like betrayal in her mouth. "Not because I want to give up, but because I don't want to risk losing everything, including each other." Marcus was quiet for a long time, his arm tightening around her as he considered their dwindling options. "Elena, this ranch represents everything I am, everything my father worked to build. If I give it up without a fight, what kind of man does that make me? What kind of father?" Elena turned in his arms to face him in the darkness. "Marcus, the kind of man you are isn't determined by the land you own or the fights you win. It's determined by the choices you make to protect the people you love. If giving up this ranch means keeping our family safe, then that's what a good man does." The wisdom in her words was undeniable, but Marcus struggled with the implications of surrender. The Three Rivers Ranch was more than property to him. It was identity, legacy, the foundation upon which he had built his sense of purpose and self-worth. To walk away felt like abandoning not just land but everything he believed about himself. Their deliberations were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching the ranch house, multiple riders moving with the deliberate pace of men who were not trying to conceal their presence. Marcus rose from the bed and moved to the window, his rifle ready as he tried to identify the newcomers in the darkness. "It's Tom Brennan," he called back to Elena.
relief evident in his voice. "And he's got company." Elena quickly dressed and joined Marcus on the porch, where Tom Brennan sat his horse alongside 3 other men she recognized as neighboring ranchers. All 4 men were armed and alert, their faces grim with purpose in the lamplight that spilled from the house windows. "Marcus, Elena," Tom greeted them with uncharacteristic formality. "We heard about the barn fire, came to see if you were all right and to discuss the situation." Marcus stepped forward, grateful for the support but wary of involving his neighbors in his conflict with Garrison. "Tom, I appreciate the concern, but this is my fight. I don't want to drag others into it." Tom Brennan's weathered face creased with a grim smile. "Marcus, you're a good man, but you're thinking too small. This isn't just about your ranch anymore. Garrison's been making his rounds, pressuring every small rancher in the valley. He's told us all the same story about the railroad and development, made us all the same threats about what happens to those who don't cooperate." One of the other men, Jake Morrison from the Circle M Ranch, urged his horse forward. "Marcus, we've been talking among ourselves, and we've decided that if Garrison wants a fight, we'll give him one. But we fight together or we don't fight at all." Elena felt a surge of hope at the unexpected show of solidarity, but she also understood the dangers of escalation. "Gentlemen, we're grateful for your support, truly we are, but Garrison has resources none of us can match. If this becomes an armed conflict, people are going to get hurt." Tom Brennan nodded gravely. "Elena, you're right to be concerned, but sometimes fighting is the only choice that leaves a man able to look at himself in the mirror. We've all worked too hard and too long to build what we have to just hand it over to a bunch of Eastern speculators, who see us as nothing more than inconveniences." The meeting that followed lasted until nearly dawn, as the ranchers shared information about Garrison's activities and developed plans for mutual support and protection. It became clear that the railroad development was even more extensive than Marcus and Elena had realized, encompassing not just their ranch but the entire valley system that supported all their operations. As the men prepared to leave, Tom Brennan pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. This fight we're getting into, it's not going to be won by guns and defiance. Garrison has lawyers and politicians in his pocket, connections that reach all the way to Denver and maybe beyond. If we're going to beat him, it will be by being smarter than he is, not tougher." Marcus appreciated Tom's wisdom, but he struggled with the implications. "Tom, what are you suggesting? That we fight him in court? We don't have that kind of money, or those kinds of connections." Tom smiled with the confidence of a man who had lived long enough to learn that every problem had a solution, if you were creative enough to find it. "Marcus, you're thinking like a rancher instead of like a businessman. Garrison needs this entire valley for his railroad project to work. If even one of us refuses to sell, holds out and fights him publicly, it could delay the whole project long enough to cost his investors more money than they're willing to spend." Elena had been listening to their conversation with growing understanding. "Tom, you're talking about turning this into a public relations battle instead of a private property dispute." "Exactly," Tom confirmed. "Garrison's strength is in backroom deals and private pressure. But if we can make this into a public fight, get newspapers involved, maybe even some politicians who aren't in his pocket, then we change the entire nature of the conflict." The strategy session that followed revealed depths of planning and political awareness that surprised both Marcus and Elena. Tom Brennan, despite his reputation as a simple trader and mountain man, had connections throughout Colorado territory that could be mobilized in support of their cause. The other ranchers brought their own resources and knowledge, creating a network of resistance that was far more formidable than any individual ranch could provide. By the time the meeting ended, they had developed a comprehensive plan that addressed both the immediate security concerns and the longer-term legal and political battle they would need to wage. Elena found herself appointed as the coordinator for their correspondence campaign, using her education and writing skills to craft letters to newspapers, politicians, and potential allies throughout the region. As spring turned toward summer, the conflict with Garrison escalated into exactly the kind of public battle that Tom Brennan had envisioned. Elena's letters to newspaper editors resulted in articles questioning the methods being used to acquire railroad right-of-way, while Marcus and the other ranchers organized public meetings that drew attention to their cause. Garrison responded by increasing the pressure on individual ranchers, but he also found himself fighting on multiple fronts as public opinion began to turn against his heavy-handed tactics. The barn-burning incident became a symbol of corporate intimidation, and Elena's pregnant condition made her a sympathetic figure in the press coverage of their struggle. The turning point came when Elena went into labor during a particularly tense confrontation between Garrison's men and the ranchers. Marcus had been away meeting with a territorial official when the labor pains began, and Elena found herself relying on the network of neighbors and friends they had built through their resistance efforts. Martha Williams and 2 other ranch wives rallied to Elena's side, transforming the Reed Ranch House into an impromptu birthing center while maintaining watch for any sign of Garrison's men. Tom Brennan and Jake Morrison established a protective perimeter around the property, determined that this new life would enter the world in safety and peace. The birth of Maria Elena Reed became a moment of triumph that transcended the immediate circumstances of the conflict with Garrison. As Elena held her daughter for the first time, surrounded by friends who had become family through shared struggle, she understood that they had already won the most important battle. They had created a community strong enough to protect what mattered most, regardless of what challenges might still lie ahead. Marcus arrived home to find his expanded family safe and well, his daughter sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms while David played quietly nearby under the watchful eyes of their neighbors. The sight of his children and the woman he loved, protected by friends who had chosen to stand with them against overwhelming odds, filled him with a sense of completion that no amount of land or cattle could have provided. Garrison made one final attempt to pressure them into selling, arriving at the ranch with an increased offer and renewed threats just days after Maria's birth. But the man who met him in the ranch yard was not the isolated rancher he had expected to intimidate. Marcus stood surrounded by neighbors, backed by a community that had chosen resistance over submission, and supported by public opinion that had turned decisively against Garrison's methods. "Mr. Garrison," Marcus said with quiet dignity, "I believe I speak for all of us when I say that your services are no longer needed in this valley. The railroad will have to find another route, and you'll have to find other people to intimidate." Garrison's defeat was complete, though he refused to acknowledge it directly. "This isn't over, Reed. There are other ways to get what we need, other routes that might prove even more profitable." Elena appeared on the porch, carrying Maria while David clung to her skirts. Her appearance was timed perfectly, a reminder to all present of what they were really fighting to protect. "Mr. Murphy," she said with the authority of a woman who had faced down far greater challenges than his threats, "it is over. You've lost, and it's time for you to accept that with whatever grace you can manage." As Garrison and his men rode away for the final time, Elena and Marcus stood with their children and their friends, watching the sun set over the mountains that surrounded their valley. The threat was ended, their home was secure, and their family was complete in ways that neither had dared to imagine when Elena first arrived with nothing but hope and a basket containing a baby and a hen. Henrietta, as if understanding that her role in their story was now complete, produced not one but 2 eggs that evening, her first double production since their arrival at the ranch. Tom Brennan declared it a sign of divine approval, while Elena and Marcus simply accepted it as another small miracle in a year that had been full of them. Years later, when their children asked about the early days of their life at the Three Rivers Ranch, Elena and Marcus would tell them about courage and community, about the power of ordinary people to stand together against overwhelming odds. They would speak of the importance of fighting for what matters, of the difference between surrender and strategic retreat, and of the way love and determination could overcome even the most determined opposition. But they would always begin the story with Henrietta, the remarkable hen whose faithful daily contribution had made everything else possible. Because sometimes the greatest victories start with the smallest acts of faith, and sometimes the most important journeys begin with nothing more than the courage to trust in promises that seem impossible but prove to be exactly what the heart was hoping for all along. The Three Rivers Ranch prospered in the years that followed, becoming not just a successful cattle operation but a symbol of what could be accomplished when good people chose to stand together. Elena and Marcus raised their children with the values that had sustained them through their trials, teaching them that true wealth was measured not in land or money but in the strength of the relationships that bound them to each other and to the community they had helped to build. And through it all, Henrietta continued her faithful service, producing eggs with the reliability that had made her legendary throughout the territory. She lived to see David grow into a fine young man who shared his stepfather's love of the land, and Maria develop into a strong young woman who inherited her mother's determination and intelligence. When Henrietta finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, she was buried with honors beneath an apple tree that Elena planted in her memory, a lasting tribute to the small creature whose big heart had made all their happiness possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.